Sales is a nasty word, or at least that's what Hollywood has made you believe. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Fervent 4. Did you know that only 4% of businesses ever cross the annual $1 million revenue mark? What's up? I'm Zack Miller, author of Anomaly, How to Finally Stand Out from the Crowd. With me today, I have my co-host, Tim Ryan, lead man at startwheel.org. Thanks for joining us. The Fervent 4 is a weekly show each and every Thursday at 11 a.m. dedicated to sharing insights into growing a world-class business no matter the climate. It's pretty hot out today. The Fervent 4 is powered by the SBDC, which helps local small businesses grow through counseling and resources like this show. If you're interested in learning more on how the SBDC can help your business, head to startwheel.org/weekly. Without sales, your business is a hobby and cannot succeed. Insert Chad Stenzel, a sales training guru with so much experience, I can't list it all here. But once he sold ice to an Eskimo. I think that's how that line is supposed to go. Who knows? Is that first question is like, have you really sold ice to an Eskimo, Chad?
Well, Zach, I wouldn't sell anything to somebody that they didn't need. So if I did sell it to an Eskimo, it's because they definitely needed some ice at that time.
I guess we didn't talk about the climate that they were in. Maybe that Eskimo was in Miami.
And the only way to find that out would be how?
I don't know. Ask them questions.
You have to ask good questions. Exactly right, Zach.
Well, as the best interview in the world, obviously I know a thing or two about what question
you certainly do
to ask. What was the first? Do you remember like the first thing that you ever sold in your life, like as a kid?
Well, as a kid, I guess probably the proverbial lemonade stand, right? So I remember doing that. I also remember playing sports. Every once in a while, I think we had to do a fundraiser. And at some point, I think I had to sell some frozen pizzas that I'm sure were marked up ridiculously and probably no better than what you'd find at the grocery store. But I remember walking around the neighborhood selling those things. And of course,
were they like the frozen pizzas where you had to like put the whole kit together too?
No, I think they were assembled. It was a little more highbrow, right? They were assembled for you, but I remember those kind of things. And early in I wasn't one of these kids. I think some kids probably use Zack. Maybe you thought from the very beginning, I'm going to be in business. I'm going to do all these things, or I'm going to be this great salesperson. I was not that way. I was going to play quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings, and my genetics made sure that there was no chance that was actually going to happen, probably. So at some point I transitioned into this thought, but so it was later in life, I guess. For me, I was probably in my early to mid 20s when I started to really get interested in this idea of selling and entrepreneurship. So, but the first thing, the standard lemonade.
So you brought up the Minnesota Vikings. So when Lizzo says no man on the Minnesota Vikings, who do you think that man is?
I have no idea. I've heard speculation. Apparently, it was somebody who I don't think is on the team anymore at this point. But the interesting thing to me about that song, the Vikings, this will bore everybody probably listening, but one of their main rivals are the Green Bay Packers. And in Wisconsin, the pop station actually bleeped that out when she says Minnesota Vikings, because it was so controversial. You couldn't talk about the Vikings in Green Bay. So that's what I know about that song.
I mean, it's a popular song. I thought you would have the inside scoop on that by asking great questions, but I'm so sorry. So lemonade is the first thing that you sell.
Yeah.
Is that, and we talked to, you kind of alluded to like the fact that like kids and selling things in business, but like, and you guys both have kids. I don't, but like, it'll be interesting to hear, like, I didn't grow up thinking about being in business. I don't think that's necessarily a negative thing. I don't think that's something that like my parents were trying to instill in me and be like, hey, like start your own business. But like, now it is. I think it because of things like Shark Tank in 2010, the growth of entrepreneurship, probably Zuckerberg and Facebook being so big. Like, is that something now that you guys see your kids being taught in school? Like, hey, build your thing and make a dominant business out of it? Like, is that something that's being taught now?
Tim, are you seeing that?
Yeah, I mean, my daughter recently was in a competition for DECA, which is a marketing competition, if you will. And one of the subsegments of DECA was entrepreneurship. So, and I was really impressed. Just the amount of detail and the knowledge that they're learning at such a young age it's way beyond what we didn't even have anything. So it was much more than I expected. And I think the barrier to entry is so much lower now than it was back when we were younger as well.
Yeah, my kids are a little bit younger, so I'm not seeing the exact curriculum. Although my oldest, Jackson, is definitely going to be a businessman. He was watching. This was 2 or 3 years ago. He was probably 7 or 8 years old at the time, and we were at a beach house property, not here in another state, but they struggle with parking down there. And so you'll find these lots pop up. And there were 2 kids who lived next door who had started a lemonade stand. And they'd been selling lemonade for 2 days. And he went down and talked to them. And, they kind of puffed up about how they'd made, $15 or $20, sitting there for 2 days. And they were excited about that. And they were about his age. And so he comes up to me and says, "Dad, can we sell parking?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, we've got space. Can I sell? People need parking spots." So he goes out, and I kid you not, in 20 minutes time, he'd sold 8 spaces where we could fit cars in at $20 a piece. And so he comes, he comes up and he's got $160 he made in less than a half an hour. And of course he wanted to go rub it in those kids' face. I said, "No, you're not going to go rub it in their faces that they've been sitting there for 2 days." But that was sort of, I'm seeing that in him. He certainly appreciates that. And one of the things I'm noticing is colleges now are finally coming around to this idea that we actually need to teach people how to sell. I've done some work with ODU locally. I know Zack, I know you've done several things with them, and this idea of entrepreneurship and sales is really starting to impact. In fact, Sandler, the company that I own a franchise with, actually has a curriculum now in the Harvard Business School, where they're utilizing some of what we teach for their MBA programs. And so that was unheard of, even 10, 15 years ago. There was hardly any of that. It was marketing, it was accounting. So I am seeing a definite shift where entrepreneurship and this whole idea of pitching your ideas is really catching on in formal education.
So Chad, you've worked with probably hundreds upon hundreds of people, helping them with the sales process. In terms of age demographics, who are the easiest ones to work with? Is it the younger crowd? Is it the older crowd because they have more business sense? What's your take on that?
Yeah, good question, Tim. I would say it's probably not so much an age thing as it is more of what I would call maybe an attitude thing. And it's the people who are lifelong learners. People who embrace this idea of learning are the people that are the easiest to work with, because you've got a certain segment of people who say, well, look, some people will say, well, look, I've been doing this for 20 years. I got 20 years of experience. What can you teach me? And the truth is they may have 1 year of experience. They've just repeated 20 times. And what I also see, though, is, we work with sometimes broad organizations where we might have 20, 30, 50 people, from the same organization coming through some of our training. And sometimes the people who are at the top in terms of their ranking, in terms of how much they're selling, are the eagerest to sit in and learn, right? Even though they're already killing it, their idea is, well, look, I always want to do better. And then you've got other people who say, this is maybe a waste of my time. What are you going to tell me that I haven't already learned? And so rather than an age split, what I really see, it's this sort of attitude. Are you somebody who likes to get out of your comfort zone, somebody who likes to learn, or are you more of a fixed mindset that says, look, there's not much more I can get out of this?
Interesting. Brian Wells just said something, and I know you and I have both met him before. He said the other day, I'm going to throw it up on the screen. Actually, that's way too big. Never mind. I'm not going to do that. But he said the other day, it made me so proud. Hold on. The other day, it made me so proud to hear my son and my neighbor's daughter talk about their dad and how they are bosses. And one day they will be bosses too. I love the encouragement there. They were literally arguing about whose dad is a bigger boss. That's awesome. Just the fact that children are having conversations about independence and ownership is incredible. And I think a lot of the stuff, in the world is taught. A lot of the stuff that we learn about it is through learning. And so that learning vehicle is going to change over time. But, and over time, like with you, and when you grew up, it was probably with like you learned how to count on an abacus and I'm just messing, dude. I know Chad well, and I like to kid him. Please don't make fun of my hair or something like that as the comeback to that. But like things change, the vehicle might change, but the actual like product, the actual substance to that isn't gonna change, right? And so I think learning the foundation of that is so incredibly important. What's something that you've seen kind of your sales training where the vehicle is changing, right? So radio was before, TV, cell phone, now it's who knows what's next, right? But like, what's something that you've seen in kind of the sales sphere that the media has changed, but not really the actual foundation of that thing that people need to learn to ultimately sell from?
Well, I think the most obvious one to me is the ability to connect personally with someone, that personal communication. And we see this so much in today as we have become more digital, right? And we stepped on the gas and really accelerated that, in the last 3 months in terms of digital, but it still comes down to that personal connection and that ability to get to know someone and talk to someone and build trust. And this is what, so not just salespeople, but so many companies, I think, where they really drop the ball is they create a website and they say, okay, well, I'm going to get this website, if I get it just right, it's going to sell for me. And depending, unless you're just selling retail, right? If you're selling something retail, then maybe that's a little different. But for a lot of organizations, your website ought to be designed just to get to the point where now you can engage. That's the entire point of marketing, right? Is now, how do I get that engagement with somebody who's a good, potential fit for me? And so that's the thing that I think will never go out of style is what do we do when we actually get that person now who wants to talk to us? And how do we have those conversations? And how do we pour into them to start to build some credibility? I think too many people now, think because everything's digital, well, there's just this shortcut sort of easy button. And so if I just build the right click funnel, then we don't have to worry about how to actually talk to somebody. And I don't see that for most of us as being a good long-term strategy. I think it's still going to come down to how do you have that good conversation once you pull them into that funnel.
Well, longevity is so incredibly important. I mean, think about how many people that you had never seen an email about 3 months ago, right? Somehow you were subscribed to their list. That's great. That's fine, whatever. And then they sent you an email or two. And then I guess it didn't work because they hadn't been nurturing them for a long time. Sure. And then here we are 91 days later, whatever it is, and they went bye-bye. Huh. Imagine that. I wonder why that happened, right? I know the answer. I know you know the answer. Like the answer is they got lazy and it didn't work long enough. And they thought that, just because I emailed this thing or just posted this thing, it was going to work. And last time I checked, that strategy doesn't work. And I think that's what you're getting into. It's like, hey, some of these things that you learn from other people can work. However, the key to all this is nurture, 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 nurture. And then when you nurture enough and you're asking the right questions, great things happen out of that. And if you compare that with what you sell, amazing things can happen out of that. So when someone is thinking about what questions do I ask and they suck at asking questions, what's a good first question, an icebreaker, or how to really figure out something about someone that they didn't know to then get them to hopefully later down the line, maybe acquire or make a transaction?
Well, I think the first thing is, are we talking about a net brand new conversation, right? So, and also I would say where you are, may have some bearing on that as well, right? So if we're in a more informal setting, I think, your first question ought to be just focused on them. Hey, what are you up to? What is it that you're interested in right now? What are you learning? I know, Zach, you love to ask people what they're watching on Netflix. And it's that idea about really creating some sort of a relationship first. And what, my go-to, particularly if we are in a more of a formal setting, I just like to ask people, so tell me what you do. What is it? What is it you do? You tell me, and a follow-up to that might be, tell me why you do what you do, because I really want to focus on finding out more about them. The way I look at, particularly, let's just say in the word of prospecting, right? I'm looking for people who might be a fit, but I'm also looking for people who aren't a fit. And what I mean by that is, as I'm having a conversation with someone now, I could put them into different buckets. I might say, hey, Zach seems like a really cool guy. He's a guy I'd like to go have wings and a beer with sometime. But after talking to him for 4 or 5 minutes, he's probably not a fit for my business model. Right. So I'm sort of sorting in that way. Whereas I talk to somebody else and I say, what, some of the things that I'm hearing from them, some of the things they do might be in alignment for some of what we do. And so I think you start off just very, very general, tell me about yourself. Tell me about what you're doing. What are you up to? The question that I've been using now, if we can, and I don't know how much we want to talk about COVID or focus on that, but sort of, as I'm doing outreach, one of the questions that I've gone to now is to ask people to sort of, give me an idea of how they've been impacted. And so it might sound something like, hey, Zach, as I'm talking to people, I'm finding really one of two buckets that people are falling in. Some people are looking at right now as a great opportunity for growth and, to really charge ahead and maybe even try things they've never tried before. And then I'm hearing from other people who are just sort of trying to hang on and get through this period and really sort of, battening down the hatches. Which one of those buckets would you say you fall in?
So let's say this is a new person. So you said there's two different types of people, the people that you just met basically. So, and then you said, hey, I want to build a relationship with these individuals. When if I go to a networking event and someone asks me that question as the first question, it's what everyone else asks me, right? So nothing stands out. Yeah. But then why are you asking about what they basically do for a living as a first question? From a relationship standpoint, it seems like it seems counterintuitive to what you're trying to do. If you're building a relationship, why do you need to know what kind of business that they're in?
Well, again, I think for me, it depends on what is the setting we're in, right? If I meet this person at a cocktail party, that's probably not my first question. If I'm meeting them at a quote unquote business networking event, I probably tend to lead with that. And here's why. And you could certainly lead in other areas. But what I'm looking for is I want to hear something about them, right? So whether it's Netflix, whether it's, what's something cool you've done lately, to me, the more important thing is that I start off focused on them, because here's the mistake that I see a lot of people make. You meet someone at a whether it's a networking event or a more informal thing, and right away they want to tell you about them. Right? They want to tell you about themselves and what they're, hey, let me tell you about this book that I'm working on. And they just go on to this long thing, or let me tell you about, this amazing product that I've got right now. And what happens is you learn, they spend all this time filibustering, and then they turn around, and by the time they want to ask somebody else something, right, that person's already probably exhausted. So I always, whatever you do, my point would be to focus on that person you're talking to. If the focus is on you, then I think you're doing it wrong. And so it's really about finding out more about them, finding about what they're going through, particularly now, right? How are they being impacted? How are they thinking through these things? To me, that's what's helpful as I'm trying to sort through, to figure out, is this somebody we should invest more time in?
So how has that landscape changed? I mean, so you probably have certain training plans, if you will, as far as when you're working with people, how the sales process works. And now the cocktail hours are gone, so like, are you all revamping, or what has emerged as the best way to start that conversation today?
Well, it's a good question, Tim, and I'll answer that, but let me actually back off of that just a bit, because when you say what's working now, here's one thing I've noticed, and I'm sure you and Zack are both, I'm sure you've picked up on this too. Everything has gotten really compressed time-wise, right? And what I mean by that is, I'll have sometimes people even that I'm working with will say, Chad, based on everything that's going on right now, what should my business look like, in a year or 6 months? And so my response now is, look, I don't think we're in a place where we should even be talking about a year or 6 months. Let's talk about what your business needs to look like in the next 60 days or 30 days. And so, when you ask what's working now, what was working great back on March 17th for me, which was hosting a lot of live webinars, bringing in people, and we would get several hundred people on, at once, because everybody was like, hey, I need to talk to somebody. I need to see somebody. I need some good information. And then, of course, as time drug on, everybody got Zoom fatigue, and everybody, so the answer to that question is you've got to be pivoting very quickly now, right? So we got these two things, right? So Zack asked earlier about those principles that never change. And that is building trust and credibility, and putting the other person's interest first as you're talking to them, because ultimately that's what's going to help you in the long run, right? The more you learn about them, those things are sort of the eternal things. But in terms of what's working now, what I've found that's working now, and this is, I guess, is a bit of an internal, is communication. Communicate. One of the areas, and I'll just, to open up and be vulnerable, where I've dropped the ball in the past as a business owner is where I've had a client or a customer and you start to take them for granted. And I don't mean that you drop service. I don't mean that you don't deliver everything you promised to them. But what can happen is, over time, you get into a routine, or really what I would call a rut when it comes to your communication, right? Well, we've got this regular meeting. And so, we do this, whether it's once a week or twice a month or once a month, that's sort of when we do it. And we give them all we've got in there. Well, when things start to change rapidly, as they have been for several months, and they continue to do, it's incumbent on us to throw those routines out the window. Whatever you've got scheduled, forget that. You need personal outreach. And it's, by the way, it's not a mass email that says, hey, given these uncertain times, blah, 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 that nobody reads, right? You got sick of them after the first day. It's about picking up the phone, right? Or sending something maybe it's a text message. It's some of one of those old fashioned forms of communication that is personal to that person. And so that's I think one of the biggest keys that we've got to realize right now is communication. And what we might even sometimes think of over communication is more important than ever. But of course, there's a right way to do it, right? There's the right way to do it. But it's also, I think it's about being personalized. It's not about a mass email. It's not about, well, we'll get them when we have our scheduled meeting. No, I've found that I've got to reach out, more than ever before, because people do have questions, people have concerns, and helping people find clarity, I found to be one of the most useful things for us. We've actually been fortunate enough, Tim, to not only not lose any clients through this, but to have a pretty significant increase in our net revenue. And it was through a lot of effort of outreach. It was through, doubling and tripling down on what we were doing before. So we didn't ever look at this and say, oh boy, we better stop selling because there's a virus. We looked at it and said, we've got to reach out and prospect harder than ever before. But of course, we're going to do it with a different tone and a different way than perhaps we did, before. But that's really the biggest change I've seen, is even more importance on communication.
Yeah, and to take that one step further, we live in such a copycat world with that compressed timeline that you were talking about. So it's like everybody jumps on board with the unprecedented times, and we're with you kind of thing. So, I love the fact that you communicate with everybody on an individual basis, but do you also see that there's a need that you have to get out there with the message to everybody so that everyone else can see that you're with them? I mean, it's just, and how do you stay ahead of the pack during this copycat time?
Yeah. I think a couple of things. I think one is, yes, there is a place for that messaging, but don't, in Sandler, we've got a rule. If your competition is doing it, stop doing it right away. And what we mean by that is don't sound like everybody else, right? So find your unique voice. But I think the other thing is, if you're going to have a mass message, have it actually mean something, right? Don't, and backing up to the beginning stuff, right? So saying, we take COVID-19 very seriously, and we're doing everything we can to ensure the safety of our employees and our client, right? That boilerplate stuff, what does that really tell me? Instead, tell me what you're actually doing, right? Give me some specifics. What are you doing? And the other thing I would say is, in terms of this mass messaging, your website is so crucial that it is updated to reflect what you are actually doing and what's happening. It ought to be easy to see, right? And as things shift and change. So, for instance, if your hours have changed, that should be easy to see as soon as people look you up, right? Hey, we've got new hours, or, we're now available, by phone 24 hours a day at this number. Whatever what are actually doing, make that really obvious for people. Because one of the biggest things, that I heard from businesses in those first following months was, hey, we've got people calling us saying, we didn't realize you were still open, right? Well, shame on them for not putting that message out there and making it extremely clear that we're open for business. We shifted on a dime like that. We were doing 40 to 50% of our training virtually before mid-March, just as a, sort of the way we are doing things, because we've got diverse, sales teams and management teams spread all over the country that we work with. But we had to change immediately. And, we reached out to everybody and said, nothing's changing. Our schedule's not changing. We're just going to be talking, via computer. And we're still going to do this the same and this the same and this. But that had to be a real concerted effort of instant communication. So we didn't have that week or two where everybody's like, I don't know, what are we going to do? What's happening? And so that becomes crucial.
Well, and I think oftentimes too, it's like, one-on-one messages that should be one-on-one, mass where mass should be, right? And I think oftentimes people will flip-flop that, which is so unnecessary. It's like, it's not hard to have a one-on-one conversation with people. I'm not saying sit there and have a 4-hour-long conversation. Call the person, talk to them for 30 seconds, let them know this thing, and call it a day, right? And just like you said, there's businesses that were open that they didn't know about, and they didn't even tell people, let people know the most important stuff and go with that. It's incredibly interesting to me also from the copycat game. I call it the Black Friday ad, right? You see a bunch of people, they get the Black Friday ads. They're excited about it for a little bit. And then you get to the fourth person and then you see the fourth message and you're like, I'm over this, right? We have such a rapid acceleration of this. I feel like that's now the new word of the day from Chad. Acceleration, rapidness of this. You're seeing that every week now with something different. It's just like copycat. A couple weeks ago,
every single car commercial is exactly the same right now.
Well, now you're seeing people that are trying to replicate the Zoom ads, where it's like, oh, here's the sticker of the I don't know what it is. It's like the new Brady Bunch thing that I started when I talked about how people were pushing out the Zoom pictures, but now you're seeing the commercials, the actual broadcast commercials that'll have the main thing up, and then on the sidebar they'll have other people talking. It's like, now other people doing that. It's like, come on, guys, have some sort of originality built in there. People, it's
amazing, and I'm going to go back to this thought.
It's not amazing. It's laziness.
You're right, but here's what I'm going to say: that you get so much more mileage out of picking up the phone and asking someone, "Hey, just thought about you based on everything I'm seeing that's going on. Just wanted to let you know I'm thinking about you. Is there any way that I could be helpful right now, right? Or is there something that is particularly challenging for you right now? And I'd be curious to know what that is, and if there's any way I can help, let me know." Just that sort of a invested in others approach to me is worth 1,000 times more than, hey, let's get a marketing department to craft a really slick looking, Instagram post or something that's going to go out there, because it's how is that hitting you? How is this current scenario hitting you? That simple question, I think, opens up somebody to say, wow, Tim actually cares, I guess. Let me share with him. Let me talk to him. And it may open up business opportunities and it may not. But what it does is your credibility now goes through the roof. What I've told so many people is a lot of what we were doing, especially in those first few months, right? I feel now we're coming through some of this, but in those first couple of months, I kept telling people, look, you're not even so much doing what you're doing now to try to win the business now. What you're doing now for how you're perceived on the other side of this, right? That needs to be a lot of what your focus is. It's not just, well, gee, are we going to, be able to add or grow, or, some of that could happen. But the real reason to have those conversations and stay in front of your prospects and your clients is so when we're through this in 2-3 months and looking back on it, you're the first person they think of that says, you know what, Zack was there checking in on me, where incumbent A, I barely ever heard from them, right? I wasn't even sure they were open, because even though we've been using them for years, we barely heard from them.
No, but they sent out that newsletter.
That's right.
Don't you worry. Also, when you get someone on the phone, guess what? You understand context, right? You send an email. It's like, well, I think this is their tone that they're saying, but I don't really know. I think this is what they're saying. Oh, they said but they meant the. They said tomato, but they meant tomato. They said orange and they meant banana. I don't know. I just made that last one up. It sounded fun. But I mean, context is so important. And so even when I'm coaching clients through from a sales perspective, I'm like, hey, maybe you should get them on the phone, because this email is looking like the 77,000 other people that is emailing them. I don't think what you're saying is necessarily that bad, but to them, without the context of you actually having that conversation with them, it's looking like another Control Alt Delete disaster. And it's just like, let me get out of this. And so by being on the phone with someone, by having them in their own one-on-one scenario, you can get a lot better results. And I think all three of us believe in that kind of mindset. I was thinking the other day about even Start Norfolk stuff when I did Start Norfolk way back when. By the way, I haven't done that in 5 years, and some people still think I'm doing it, which is still pretty funny. It means you built something pretty powerful there. What's interesting, though, is I had a ton of one-on-one conversations with people. I would individually reach out to people all the time. I would say 90% of the ticket sales in the first probably 1 through 3 Start Norfolks were done because of one-on-one conversations that I had with people. And I think it's incredibly valuable. And I'm sad that potentially that day where you can't have that one-on-one opportunity with people would go away. I don't think it's ever going to go away, but I would be sad to see that day would ever.
The loyalty that you build is huge, and you're not even selling anything.
Another email,
right?
Yeah. Did you ever go to a Start Norfolk, Chad?
I did, yeah. When you were there, I've been to one.
Okay. There's so many people, thousands of people have attended, the millions watching all around the world. That was a stolen line from WWE.
You can't go wrong stealing from them, right?
Well, depending on who you talk to, it could be. What's the best question you've ever been asked, Chad?
The best question I've ever been asked. Yeah. Well, the best question that I've learned, I think, from somebody else, and I use this all the time, is, what is it that I should have asked that I have not asked? That one has pulled me out and saved me so many times, right? Because we all think of ourselves, as these masters of questioning, and I'll get to the bottom of this and I'll pull this out. But that simple question, particularly as it relates to somebody's scenario, right? So if they're in a certain situation or scenario, to ask that at the end of a conversation or a session, I've found that to be incredibly useful, because it usually, it does one of two things, right? One thing they might say is, you've asked everything. No, this was great. And so now they kind of have to validate you, right? Or the other thing that will happen is they'll say, well, you haven't asked me about this, and this is pretty important. And so now it opens up, an entire another avenue for us to go down, which would be, particularly useful if I'm trying to help this person in any way or solve whatever their issue or challenge is. And so I think that's one of the questions that I've, somebody shared with me that I now try to use every time I'm, in it, not even just a sales meeting, right? It could be talking to employees or friends that are going through something and struggling, and you're trying to find out how you might be able to help them. That question of, is there anything that I haven't asked or we haven't talked about that we should? And so I found that to be very useful.
So a lot of the viewers today, they are business owners themselves. What's the mix of people that you work with? Is it business owners, or is it people that business owners hire as salespeople? And what message do you have to those business owners? I know I've worked with a lot of business owners, and the answer to their growth strategy is, I'm going to hire a salesperson. And I'm like, you're always going to be the number one salesperson in your company. And they always think that the answer is, I'm just going to hire somebody. So to a business owner that has that fear of sales, what's your advice to them?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And my mix, to go to the first part of that, in terms of who I actually, sign business with, 98% of it are people who own a business, probably. Every once in a while, I might, sell to a sales rep or, maybe a sort of a real estate agent type person, something like that. But most of the people we work with on the front end are business owners. Now, they may have us training some of their people, but I've got sort of a non-negotiable, which is this: management must play, meaning if you're going to invest in your company in any way, you've got to be part of the training group. I don't allow people to just quote unquote send their folks through training, because what I found is that ultimately that doesn't work well, because now, number one, who's holding these people accountable when they're not in front of me? And number two, everybody kind of looks around and says, well, gee, the boss isn't here, so is this really that big of a deal? So, we primarily always start with working through business owners, entrepreneurs. In terms of the sales question, I just had this conversation, actually, thank goodness, and I've got another one scheduled tonight. We're finally able to meet in person a couple places. So I was sitting on a rooftop, sort of a restaurant bar just a couple of days ago with a prospect, and we were having this conversation about, hey, how do I grow this sales team, right? And so my advice to them, and this happens to be what I do, but I'm not giving you this advice saying you've got to reach out to Sandler, reach out to me. Just have a process. And so one of the challenges is, as entrepreneurs, we're so passionate about what we do that even if you're not quote unquote good at sales, oftentimes you're going to have really good results because it's your knowledge. You've lived the whole thing, right? You're able to connect and reach people even unconsciously in ways that others can't, because of how much you believe in that thing. And then as we try to scale and grow, we say, well, I'll just hire a salesperson. So, and we hire somebody, and because they're in sales, number one, they smoke us in the interview, right? They come across as being this fantastic people person, and they sell you. It's the best sale they ever made was when they sold you. And then they come in and they absolutely fall on their face. And we're like, I don't understand it. So then you spin your wheels, and how much do you invest, in paying them and hiring and finding them? And so we spend thousands and thousands of dollars. And one of the challenges is we haven't really developed a process for selling. We might have one that we don't even think about, but we don't have it laid out, where we can actually now imprint that and give that to someone else and say, this is how you engage, right? This is what you do. And so my biggest piece of advice to an entrepreneur looking to increase sales and increase their organization through sales is you've got to have a process for selling. Whatever that is, there has to be here's where, the first outreach all the way to service and delivery. What do those steps look like? And what do we expect to learn or accomplish in each one of those steps? That has to be on paper and clear, or it'll be impossible for you to duplicate and grow the business. But let me just add this while we're working through those technical challenges, assuming everybody can hear me still. I think that one of the most important things you can do if you are in business, and particularly a sales facing business, is to really figure out what does your ideal avatar of a client look like. What does that person look like, and get out of this idea that everybody should be my client. It's true that anybody you walk by on the street could be a potential client, but not everybody's a good fit. And so one of the things that I really work with companies and individuals on is this idea that making it okay to tell people no, to tell people that, after we've talked, I've got to tell you, it's great to meet with you, but I don't really see a point for us moving forward because I don't think you're a fit for what we offer and do. And that can be tough, especially if you're new in business and you're like, no, look, anybody who's got a checkbook, right, or a credit card and they're willing to pay, I'm going to take them. Longevity, going back to what you said earlier, Zach, about longevity, it doesn't serve you well to take every piece of business. There'll be pieces of business you'll regret, and you'll say, I wish we'd eliminated that person as part of our qualification process.
Do you think that Hollywood has made people, do you think Hollywood has made salespeople look like bad guys?
Well, yeah. I mean, other than perhaps the wonderful movie Tommy Boy, right? When has there ever been a real, truly positive portrayal of a salesperson, right? Tommy Boy, he was likable, and he struggled, but in the end, everybody's cheering for him. But look at every other depiction of a salesperson, right? They're always shady, underhanded. They're trying to sell something, to somebody that doesn't need it. That seems to be the overarching thing. And so I think that's part of what plays into a lot of entrepreneurs' mindsets when you talk to them about pitching what they're doing. Even, it's like, oh gosh, I don't want to be a salesperson. I didn't go into this world to be in sales. The reality is we're all in sales, but we've got to figure out how to get over some of those preconceived notions, those self-limiting beliefs that are not serving us well. And so that's why a lot of what we do, frankly, in working with people, is working on the mental side of it. A lot of people always come to you and they say, well, I need help. Teach me how to say this or to ask this. And that's about a third of success in sales. A third of it is the tactical stuff. How do you do it? Another third is, how do you think about yourself? And how do you think about this profession or this act of selling? And if you've got this idea that, hey, anybody who sells is, trying to rip people off, then you're going to really struggle to sell. If in the back of your mind you're thinking, gee, am I doing something wrong here, right? Whatever messages we got as kids, sometimes some of us have messages that don't serve us well rattling around in the back of our head. One of them might have been, don't talk to strangers. Hey, don't talk to strangers. That's not good. And then you're like, okay, well, I got a prospect, but boy, somewhere in the back of my head, I mean, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't call somebody you don't know, So I think all these things are things we've got to work through.
Sure. What's your take on playing the long game versus the short game?
Well, I mean, I went into business to build something, right? So when I was young and not very bright, I'll remember one of my first jobs was in car sales. And by the way, so you imagine when you get out of college that your parents paid for it and said, hey, Dad, great news. I'm going into sales. I'm going to be selling cars, right? And there's this long, awkward pause on the other end of the phone, as I'm sure he's probably, just putting his face, in his hands. But young and not very bright. And so, it was like this idea of, well, let's get all we can every sale, right? Let's sell this, if we can. Why aren't we marking this up even more? Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we throwing this on there? And then, I realized there were some people in the dealership who'd been there for 30 years and they didn't have to go out on the lot and wait for somebody to drive up because they had people coming in every day asking for them. And what I realized is, when you build something for the long term, you may lose out on some initial revenue and money in that first bit, but it pays off so much, down the road, so much more down the road, because you've treated people right. You've even maybe turned down opportunities when you've, been told them. I've had to do that in my business, right? I've had conversations where I knew I could sell something to these folks. They were desperate. They needed help, but I had to be honest and say, you know what you're looking for is really not in my wheelhouse, right? And I don't want to tell you that I can do this when this isn't really where my focus is. And so if you need help with this and this and this, we knock it out of the park, and I'd be happy to. But if you're looking for this, I'll see if I can, maybe give you a referral to somebody who might be able to help you. But for me, it's not a fit. And so that's what we found. And eventually, my experience now, 5 years into this journey as a business owner, it pays off every time for me, right? Not in the initial, but long term, you're going to be so much happier when you take that long view of things versus just, handling it, trying to take advantage maybe, or even just selling something that is probably not in the best interest of that customer.
So when I hear that story about your dad, I think about everyone is a salesperson, right? Everyone is a salesman, right? And I think that you did a really poor job of explaining to him that you were going to do this, right? And so that's what you were going to do after these 4 years, because he had probably a built up, he had compound interest of Chad's going to do this next. I just spent all this money. He's going to do that next. And so the concept of everyone as a salesman, I think, is interesting because I don't think everyone thinks that. Yet we're always trying to we're always trying to convince someone of some transaction, right? Yeah. I'm trying to get this girl to go on a date with me. I'm trying to get this job. I'm trying to explain to my dad why it's okay that I'm going to be late tonight, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So looking back at this, I don't know how many years it's been, but looking back, like, what would you have done to painted a better picture to explain to your dad so he would have been excited that you're going into that instead of, oh God, Chad, I just spent all this money, and maybe you were that person that Lizzo was talking about on the Minnesota Vikings.
Well, so you bring up a good point, and I think there's so many ways you can go with this, Zack, but I think the first thing I would say is, what you're talking about, or at least what I call it, everybody wants more influence, right? Everybody. Not everybody wants to learn how to sell. In fact, I've got clients who the ownership tells me, Chad, we're putting these people in your training, and we're going to send this group in, but you cannot call it sales training. You will have people running out. We'll have people turning in their resignation, right? So what we talk about then is, all right, let's talk about how to gain more influence. Would you be interested in being able to influence more people, including maybe even your kids? Would you like to have more influence over them, your spouse? Would you like to have more influence at work with your boss, right? And so some of it is just in the way we couch things. The other thing, in terms of my specific story about dealing with my dad, I think a couple things. One is I probably should have set expectations more clearly, right? What I did is waited. I waited until I absolutely had to make that call to tell him, hey, here's what I'm getting ready to do. And one of the mistakes we make, I think, in whether in business or sales of any kind, is not setting clear expectations for people. And you're talking about, so I had obviously realized at some point, I kind of want to do this whole entrepreneurial thing, sales thing, and I was kind of leading that way, but I was sort of afraid to make that, because I knew that probably wasn't what he, quote unquote, wanted for me. And so I waited till I actually had to call and make that call. So that was part of the issue. The other thing I think that, of course, it's easy to look back and say this now, is had I realized even in those first couple sales jobs I had, how much I would learn that would help me in life. It was amazing. About that same time as I went into selling cars, I got involved in a MLM. And so, right, there's another great thing. Tell your parents after you went to college, hey, I'm also involved in a multi-level marketing company. That'll really, that'll accelerate the inheritance as they all have a heart attack, right, on the phone.
Nothing the matter with either of those, Chad. Nothing the matter with them.
Well, that's going to be my point, because here's what I'm going to tell you is, while neither of those made me wealthy or was where I found my ultimate career. I started to learn in both of those instances through the MLM as well as the job at the dealership, these life lessons. And particularly, I was introduced to this field of what we call personal development, which is this idea of ongoing, right, self-education and continually learning, how can I get better at this? And so that was a gift I got from those opportunities, was I started to learn about people who were in this field of, achievement and sales and entrepreneurship, that I would, if I had taken a regular, quote unquote, legitimate job right out of college. And at that time, if I'd have said, hey, I got a job, sitting at a desk making, whatever, $28,000 a year, they'd have been like, oh, good, good. Now stay there for 40 years and, retire.
It's not about the money, right? It's not about the money in these situations. It's about the company's perception, right? And then the compound interest that's been building up on that company's perception year after year after year. And so oftentimes the material that is sent out is outliers in many cases, where people think, oh, this used car salesman, if this one person did this, that means all used car salesmen are shady or whatever, right? The same thing with the Hollywood effect with the salesperson that we were talking about earlier, not used cars, just general salesperson, right? Yeah. And so it's the compound interest of that building block after block after block after block of whatever that thing is perceived as, even if you've had an amazing situation with that. Yeah. And I think that's something that's difficult for people to comprehend and peel back the onion and be like, well, hold on. Is this real perception is this the real indicator of what I would get if I worked with this company? Or is it perceived because a couple of bad apples have been in there? And I think oftentimes, if you see thousands of reviews of bad things on Amazon, then maybe that's a good telling sign. But like one or two, usually that's not a bad sign. And I think oftentimes we have to be thinking about, why are people actually perceiving this thing in the way that they are, one way or the other, right? I mean, why do people think Anomaly was the greatest book ever written? Duh, because this guy with long locks of love wrote it. I mean, come on, people.
Absolutely. And so, that's what I would say, especially for those of, the entrepreneurs who are tuned in or listening to this, really embrace, especially if you're newer. I don't know if anybody's still in their first year, 18 months or so, but I learned so many amazing lessons, and probably the biggest lesson I learned my first year owning a business was do not quit. Because I really thought I was going to come in and just crush this, and I got my ass handed to me over and over again in that the first 8 or 9 months. Where every time I thought something was going well and we were going to really knock it out of the park and this is an absolute done deal, I'd learn another way to not make a sale, because I would something would happen. But here's what happened. Something flipped 10 months in, where all of a sudden, hey, this one actually went through, and then this one went through, and then by the time back to the longevity that you both talked about. By the time we got into month 12, 13, 14, all of a sudden now, hey, we've got more revenue coming in now per month than we did the first 13 months we were here.
Because you didn't quit.
And it was that commitment that, somebody asked me early on, so Chad, if this doesn't work, what's your exit strategy?
Ugh,
and I kind of looked at him and I said, my exit strategy is I'm either going to make this work or I'm going to die trying. That's my exit strategy, right? So there was absolutely
why they asked that question,
for me to go.
Someone in business school said this is the way that you need to do this and blah 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 blah. It's like you've never owned it, right? So I've always been ticked off at situations where people are teaching a strategy or asking questions on a strategy where they have zero context of actually doing that. If the person is asking you a question like around starting a business, and they've never, or giving you feedback on starting a business, but they've never started a business, then guess what? You probably shouldn't take that feedback, because that person has no context of actually doing it. And oftentimes I feel like these people who say something like that, it's just like, why are you asking me that question? It's bogus, right? I mean, Tim, when was Tesla started, Tim?
12 years ago.
Okay, 12 years ago. And I know that you have on your shirt, Chad, your, what is it, insignia? Is that the word for it? But like, what brand is that shirt? Do you know?
Under Armour.
Okay, so Under Armour. And when did they get started? In the 90s, I guess?
Yeah, probably.
Right. And so think about this. Those companies, Tesla 12 years old, Under Armour 20 plus years old, I'm sure there were situations and times where they wanted to throw in the towel or things weren't going the right way. But you're wearing them today and we're endorsing them today because they stuck with it. And the longer companies stay in the game, the more likely more people are going to learn about them. Right. I mean, think about the book where the dude buys a piece of land, is trying to find gold. He's 3 feet away. It's the Napoleon Hill book. And then he basically Think and Grow Rich. Yeah. He sells the damn land. Some guy comes in and says, well, let me look at it a little differently. 3 minutes later, finds that he was 3 feet away from the damn gold. Dude lost like $100 million.
Yeah. And here's the other thing I'll say about that. You know, you talked about people. What I've found is as I do the right things, the results come, whether they come the way I expect them to or not. And what I mean is, you know, as those first 8, 9, 10 months were really tough. But what started happening is 12 months in, 13 months in, people I hadn't even reached out to all of a sudden were calling me. Right. You know, and so I'm, you know, now I'm closing sales on stuff, you know, because somebody saw me not give up. Right. It's like, you know, 12 months ago, some of those clients that were calling me would have never given me the time of day because who's this guy? But now they've seen or heard me over this period of time. And now, even though, you know, I'm maybe doing some prospecting and I'm like, gosh, you know, made 20 calls and I'm, you know, or, you know, set up, 15 meetings and not a lot came out of, but here comes one that just seemingly comes out of nowhere. And there's this, you know, whatever you want to call it, there's this sort of universal thing that I've seen working over and over again. When you're doing the right stuff, eventually the results come, but you can't always predict where they're going to come from. You know, they don't always come the way you expect it. Well, if I do 4, I get 2. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you'll do 12 and get 0, and then 7 will come on top of each other. You know, and it's like, but guess why? Guess why that happens? It's because you're out there, putting your name out there, getting your messaging across. You're in front of people, and eventually this stuff starts to happen, right? But it doesn't happen if we, you know, curl up in the fetal position with our thumb in our mouth, saying, "Oh, this is too tough. I can't do it."
Hold on, Tim. So the right stuff. Like, can you sing that that song from New Kids on the Block from back then? Because I know that you know that song.
Are you asking Tim?
No.
Surely you don't think that I ever listened to New Kids on the Block.
Yes, I do.
No,
Yes, I do. Isn't that the name of the song? Like The Right Stuff? Come on, man.
I don't know.
Either of you know it? Oh, God. I'm going to go find it and play it myself. Tim.
Yeah, Chad, I have a question for you. It's something that, like, for me, if in order for me to sell something, I have to believe in the product. I have to believe in the company. So is that belief or that passion for the company, is that something that can be taught? I mean, you know, what is your take on that? Because I think that it's just such an important piece of the selling process.
Yeah, I would agree. So there's, you know, when it comes to belief, there's sort of 3 things that I teach people that are critical for your long-term success in sales. One is I've got to believe in myself. That's the biggest part of it, right? If I don't have a good, strong belief in who I am and why I'm doing what I'm doing, then you got very little chance of being successful. The second one is I've got to believe in my market. And by market, that could mean geographical, but it also has, you know, could mean the vertical I've chosen, the industry I've chosen, right? And then the third piece of that is I've got to believe in my company, my product. And so between belief in myself, the market, the company, I've got to have all those things working for long-term success. Now, here's what's true though. Everybody's heard of beginner's luck, right? Everybody knows the story of that salesperson who came in and, you know, their first month or 2 out of the gate, they absolutely crushed it. and everybody's looking around like, what in the world? How did, and obviously they didn't have time to probably develop a lot of belief in their company, in that first month. But what did they have? They probably had uber belief in themselves, right? Or uber belief in maybe their mission or what they were doing. So, but long term, now what happens if they stick around long enough and they're like, hey, they don't always do what they say they're going to do. And, I'm upset because, the manager passed me over. Eventually, some of that belief erodes in the company, and that person who started off really strong, now they struggle because now I don't believe in the company the way I do. And eventually that comes out. Even if I try to compartmentalize it, it'll show itself in my effort, when it comes to prospecting or reaching out, because I'm upset about something. So I do think you've got to have that. And I think good leaders, right? That's what culture is all about. And that's why you ought to be recruiting to culture, right? You ought to be hiring people who are a cultural fit. To me, even more important than a skill set fit, right? You got this, I see this mistake all the time. Somebody brings in this person who's like, well, they've got, phenomenal results and they've won all these awards, and say, okay, great. Well, how are they a cultural fit for you? Well, I'm not sure they really are, but they can sell, right? That is always a disaster, right? Because they'll come in and they won't be a fit, and they'll poison others around them. And so that belief in the company and the why, as Simon Sinek would say, right? What's our mission? Why are we doing this? It's absolutely critical for long-term success.
Awesome.
Susan Acker says, I keep hearing we are from people, I suppose, we are waiting for things to open up. And I guess the question is based on, there has been some closings where people were forced to close. And what's interesting in that is, while that's true, I don't think they ever said you had to stop selling in that, right? And so I think people have to innovate and get creative. And a few weeks ago, I had posted something about thinking about Pizza Hut and how growing up, and you guys probably did too, when you went to Pizza Hut, you would go and you would sit in and take it like a normal dine-in order. And yet over the years, they recognized, because their clients, because they asked a lot of questions, it looked like their clients, their customers weren't necessarily dining in anymore. They were going and picking up the order, and then they started doing deliveries, and they were doing that. And so they've moved off of what they started doing from history. And so I think oftentimes when people see we're waiting for things to open up, well, things might never open up. And
right.
if you're focused solely on opening up like you were before, you're missing the opportunity to ask your prospects and clients questions that are based around, well, what would make your life easier? What do you actually want from us? And so as more people are going to less and less sporting games, as more people are spending more time at home watching Netflix and chill, that means more and more people are either cooking from home or ordering out. And so if you are a restaurant in this kind of case, and you aren't having more carry out and delivery options, you might want to look at what Pizza Hut has done over the years. And yes, I know you're not a national franchise like Pizza Hut, but there's precedent there. And I think that precedent there shows, just because what worked in the past doesn't mean that just because it's going to work now because you open back up. And by the way, when things do open back up, you cannot anticipate that things are just going to you get it. They're not gonna just immediately be better. And I think too many businesses are hoping that it would be like that. And this is that opportunity that people have been looking for. It just didn't look like the bright, shiny object that they had gone through with that.
Yeah, I think it was announced yesterday. Starbucks is revamping 400 stores or something
Closing
like that.
400 stores.
Well, but they're going to revamp them for that. They're not going to be a sit-down coffee shop anymore. That's going to be more geared towards takeout. Because
I love this quote, and I don't know who. Sorry, I can't attribute, but the quote is, "It's not the big that eat the small; it's the fast that eat the slow."
That's right.
And that, to me, that's what this has really shown is, regardless if you're selling roofing or remodeling or pizza, it's those companies, those individuals who were able to pivot quickly and not say, oh my gosh, we've never done it this way, but how do we do it moving forward, right? How do I change, even though I've never, traditionally done this? how do we move this forward? And you see the fallout, right? There's been a number of restaurants, thousands, I'm sure, all over the country, but even locally, we've seen, a number of restaurants who are just, well, we're not opening, we're done.
But don't pivot just because someone told you had to.
No,
right? Don't pivot because the world closed. You should be pivoting all the time anyway.
Exactly.
Right. And so you hear these individuals, these businesses, and I feel for them where they're like, oh, we can't do this. It's like, no one said you couldn't be open. Right. You might not be able to be open in the same way that you were before, but I believe I've said this for many, many times. Like, a lot of this is the acceleration of the bell curve of things that were happening anyway. And so people, it's not like takeout wasn't like 10 years ago, you could only get really carry out and delivery from pizza and Chinese. Now you can get delivery from anything, carry out from anything. And so you're seeing more of that. And I'm not saying you have to use a third party to be the delivery or carry out of that thing. You could do it on your own, and you can create a very successful business out of stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That was an awesome quote, Chad. I think that, man, that was the gem of the show.
I had a quote that I texted Tim the other day, and he didn't think it was great.
No, I didn't think that it was something that I had heard before.
I don't remember what it was. Chad, is there anything that you thought we were going to talk about today that we haven't?
Anything?
That's a quote from Chad Stenzel, by the way.
No, I guess the only thing that, that I don't know if we've touched on it yet is, and just real quickly, one of the things in Sandler, we talk about pain, some places they talk about need, and Sandler, we figured out there's all kinds of things that people need that they don't get. So let's talk about actionable pain. That is, what do they actually have to take care of now? That's where your sales come from. And so the one thought that I want to make sure we talk about on this before we're done is, whatever those pains were prior to this shutdown, they may have changed and tweaked, but that doesn't mean they're not there. In other words, figure out whatever you're selling, whatever service or product you've got, how are people now impacted differently in a way that they might need it more than they did 3 or 4 months ago. That's part of that pivot we talked about, right? But it doesn't mean that, for instance, the whole, we're waiting for things to open up, we're shutting down. Well, what that tells me is that particular, person or that client or that organization is probably in big trouble right now, right? If that's impervious throughout that organization, that whole we're waiting on things, then their pain might be they need somebody to help get them unstuck. They're waiting, hoping things go back to normal. Things are never going to go back to the way they were 100% March 15 or whatever. And so look for ways that you can help people where they are now, because they probably have different ideas or different struggles. I've got some clients who got so busy during the last 3 months because of the industry they're in that I had to work with them on, more on how do we use our time better, right? That was their new pay. It wasn't sales, because they had more sales than they could process. So we had to look at efficiency things. So think about, based on the new challenges my prospects or my clients have right now, what might their new pains, their new issues be, and how do I help them with those things?
Awesome. Great show. I think we're coming up on our time.
Oh, that was so lovely.
Thanks for having me, guys. I enjoyed it. It was a good discussion.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
People are interested in learning about Chad Sandler training. Head to the website on the screen, or ftt.sandler.com.
Absolutely. Look me up on LinkedIn too. I'm pretty active on there. So it's just Chad Stenzel. Would love to connect with anybody on there. And everybody be well.
Have you been able to get a haircut?
Well, I got a very black market, we can't talk about it, haircut at some point about a month or so ago. But I need one now. And I actually reached out to my regular, because they're now finally open, my regular place where I get my haircut. And they told me it's going to be like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And so now I've got to figure out what I'm going to do, because I can't wait another 3 weeks. So.
Yeah, I had to get an appointment. I had to set it up about 2-3 weeks ago. Mine is in the very near future. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I mean, I've grown my hair out for months, and now I'm like, oh, maybe I'll man bun it up.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's.
I think you should definitely do that and send pictures, please. We all want to see you with a man bun.
Any closing thoughts, Tim?
No, I really enjoyed it. I could talk about this for hours. This is a great show. I really enjoyed it.
Good. Hey, let's do it again sometime. I'd love to.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for participating, being a part of this. And as always, tune back in. Same bat time, same bat place next week, Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, which sometimes you're supposed to say Eastern Standard Time and sometimes you're not. I don't know. Are we in daylight savings of Eastern Standard Time?
It is. It is daylight. Yeah.
Yeah. So technically, you're not supposed to say Eastern Standard. You get it. The things I worry about in my world, whatever. Chad, appreciate you being with us today. Looking forward to doing another one in the future. Tim, appreciate it as well. And see y'all next week. Until next time, peace and pancakes, y'all.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye, everybody.